And welcome back to The Rock there, and very interesting sentiments expressed by Dr. Kluter there in the Western Cape at that operation centre of the IEC with Abra Barbier, and talking about coalitions and very interesting views expressed. My guest this morning, we have IEMSA chair, that's the executive chair of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, Tselane, and from the South African Local Government Association, Lance Joel. So interesting sentiments, but these things are very tricky. You know, there was reference there to the will of the people in terms of forming these coalitions, because there is a view that says if people wanted to elect the ANC or the DA, they would have done so. They've clearly decided not to. But of course, then there are layers to this thing as well. You've got this at local government level, but then sometimes the coalitions are formed at a national level, and then they are basically just, you know, told at the local government level that we are in coalition with Party B, and therefore that coalition should hold even at the local government level. What are your views on that? Let me start with you, Lance, and then I'll come to Terry.
Well, Sakina, the framework that we have developed is mitigating exactly against some of these things that were raised in the Western Cape interview, but also the points that you've raised now. And the starting point is, firstly, it's about a local area, a municipality. But quite often what we see is when there are negotiations happening, it is about matters that are outside of the scope of that local authority. There are national and provincial matters that find their way into negotiation agreements at the coalition level. We think it creates instability in a coalition partnership themselves. So we are asking specifically to political parties to steer away from including matters that are out of the control of those local leaders, those councillors, when trying to keep this coalition partnership afloat. The second point I thought that was made in the Western Cape, which is an interesting one, is getting the bigger political parties to work together. We have seen, leading up to the elections, that view being really defeated, saying that we are not prepared to. But we have seen in the 2016 term to date, where the DA and the ANC has worked together in the Western Cape. So it's not impossible, but it would require those political parties to look into. The last point I should make is the point made around kingmakers. Our framework specifically cautions around kingmakers, because effectively it does not give effect to the wishes of the electorate. If a single person, if a party gets a single seat, and you have parties with more seats, how is it that that person then effectively runs that municipality?
Well, they are kingmakers, they would say. But then, Terry, again, when do you actually decide on these coalitions? Should you be looking before the elections in terms of ideology or whatever else commonalities you may find that would lead to some form of arrangement before or after? How should it work ideally?
Well, in other countries, let's take, for instance, in Nigeria. In Nigeria, you've got coalitions that are established before the elections. And it's happening also in Kenya, as you may be aware, that political parties get together before the elections, and by the time they get to the elections, there is already an arrangement amongst them. However, it does not necessarily that there is a particular model that is preferable, because you never really know how the outcome of the results are going to be. So you can't just enter into a relationship on the basis that you're going to be there. What happens if you're not even elected and you don't actually get in there, and then you've got an arrangement already? So that's why this framework thing, it's important, where that there is regulation of this. But there is also an important matter here. And I think two issues, actually. One is that we've got to begin to understand that if you look at the results, they're already, even though these are local government elections, they're already beginning to show that even in some of the provinces, in 2024, we are likely not to have one party as an outright with an outright majority. Now, when you're working on the framework for hung councils. That framework must be so inclusive of even what is likely to happen at the central government level as well as at provincial level. So those are some of the important considerations. But one of the last issues that I wanted to mention is that the electorate also has got to be educated, because people go into elections with manifestos, and there is an expectation that they're going to be implementing those manifestos.
Yes.
And once they get into a relationship now where there is a hung council, it means there's got to be compromises. It does not mean that your manifesto is necessarily going to be the one that prevails. And then there is also no time to go back to the electorate and try to the people who have elected you, to say to them, and now that you have elected me, I'm going to be entering into a relationship with so and so. Those issues have got to be dealt with as a long-term solution to deal with the hung municipalities and hung arrangement.
IEMSA Executive Chair Terry Tselane and of course Lance Joel from SALGA. Thank you so much. Simpiwe says coalition governments won't work even if you make them sign those agreements, which is basically a forced marriage. Communities are going to suffer. Opposition politics are just toxic and not based on policy differences but on personalities. So love to hear from you always. But of course we go to KwaZulu-Natal.